The morning you almost missed. There is a moment that happens in your yard, probably more mornings than you realize, where everything goes still. Not the deep quiet of an empty space. Something more specific than that. A kind of charged stillness. The kind where the feeder stops swinging, the rustling in the shrubs goes silent, and the birds that were there just a second ago have simply vanished. Most people glance up from their coffee and think nothing of it. Maybe they flew off. Maybe something startled them. They go back to whatever they were doing. But that stillness was a message. And you were not the only one meant to receive it. What happened in that moment was a communication system older than language, more precise than most people give it credit for, and deeply connected to your yard specifically. The birds around you are not reacting randomly to the world. They are reading it, scanning it, scoring it. And when something shifts in the air, in the sound, the light, the movement, they respond as a coordinated intelligence. The warning had already passed through them before you ever noticed something felt off. This video is about that warning system. About how it works, what triggers it, who sends it first, who follows, and what it means for you and the birds that have chosen to spend time in your space. Because here is what most people never fully understand. The birds around your yard have not been acting out a generic survival script shared equally with every other bird on Earth. They have been building something specific. A relationship with your yard. With your rhythms. With you. And inside that relationship, they have been warning each other, and sometimes quietly, in their own way, warning you, in ways you almost certainly have not recognized yet. When they first arrived. Think back to when you first started paying attention to your backyard birds. Not as a child watching birds in some vague, unfocused way, but the first time you really noticed them. Maybe it started with one bird at the feeder. A chickadee, bold and quick. Or a cardinal who kept returning to the same branch at the same time every morning with such reliability it almost felt personal. Something made you look. Something made you look again. And before long, looking again became the start of a habit. What you were witnessing without knowing it was the first stage of a relationship arc. Not a metaphor. A real, documented behavioral progression. When birds first discover a new feeding space, they do not simply arrive and trust it. That is not how their psychology works. What they do is assess. Silently. Systematically. Often for days before you even realize they are watching. Research into avian spatial cognition has shown that birds, particularly the songbirds most commonly found in backyard spaces, carry detailed mental maps of their territories. These maps include feeding locations, water sources, shelter, escape routes, and danger zones. When something new appears in that map, they do not rush to include it. They test it. Your yard, the first time a bird found it, was a hypothesis. Not yet a fact. So the first visits were brief. Explosive arrivals and quick exits. A few seeds grabbed with almost anxious speed. Eyes scanning in every direction. Not because the bird had no interest in your feeder, but because trust had not yet been built. The relationship was barely formed. Distance was the first language. And that matters because what happened next, the way the birds moved closer over days and weeks, or the way they stayed away, was not random either. It was a response to what your yard communicated back to them. You were already part of the story. You just did not know it yet. The system they built before you saw it. Here is something that will shift how you see your yard. By the time you started noticing the birds with real attention, by the time you started pointing them out to someone else or looking up their names or feeling genuinely curious about them, the birds had already built an entire behavioral infrastructure around your space. They had identified your feeder as either safe or risky. They have mapped your windows, your cat if you have one, your dog's habits, your schedule. They had noticed what time you opened the back door. They had clocked how long you tend to stand by the glass. They had noted which corner of the yard is too exposed and which shrub sits at the ideal distance from food. And critically, they had already started warning each other about your yard. This is where the relationship becomes something more layered than most people expect. Birds in a shared territory develop what researchers call a community sentinel system. It is not one bird with one job. It is a distributed network. Different species, different vantage points, different sensitivity levels. Together, they cover what no single bird could cover alone. The American robin working the lawn detects movement at ground level. The chickadee in the serviceberry catches aerial movement and flickers in the canopy. The blue jay, sitting higher and with remarkable eyesight, watches a broader radius than most other birds would bother with. The house sparrow, perpetually twitchy, picks up subtle disturbances in the atmosphere of the yard itself. When one of them detects something concerning, the warning travels. Not in a single, unified alarm, though. The system is more nuanced than that. Different calls carry different meanings. There are calls that mean a hawk is circling above. There are calls that mean a predator is moving at ground level. There are calls that communicate a still, watchful threat, something sitting and waiting rather than actively moving. Each of these triggers a different behavioral response from the birds receiving the warning. And here is what connects this to you. Your yard has a specific warning history. The birds there have been exchanging these signals for as long as your space has been part of their territory. That history shapes their behavior right now, today, at this moment. What has felt safe, what has felt dangerous, what has resolved well, and what has not, all of it layers into the behavioral decisions you see from your window. The warnings have never stopped. You simply could not read them. The call you dismissed. There is probably a sound you have heard in your yard that you tuned out because it sounded like generic bird noise. A sharp, repeated chip note from somewhere in the hedgerow. A soft, high seat that barely registered. Or the sudden, full-throated alarm call of a robin that seemed overdramatic for the moment. These were not random. Every one of them was carrying specific, encoded information. Let's take the chickadee, because this is a bird with one of the most studied and documented warning call systems in all of backyard bird behavior. When a chickadee gives its well-known alarm call, the one that sounds like a rapid, repeated chickadee-dee-dee, the number of deep notes at the end is not just rhythmic noise. Research has confirmed that the number of deep syllables correlates directly to the size and immediate danger posed by the predator being announced. Small, agile predators, a Cooper's hawk, a sharp-shinned hawk, generate more D notes. More urgency. More alarm. Because small, fast predators are harder to evade. They turn quickly. They pursue through tight spaces. They are genuinely dangerous to small birds in ways that a large, slow-moving owl might not be. A great horned owl, enormous and powerful, might generate fewer D notes. Not because the owl is harmless, but because large predators are also less maneuverable. They are easier to see coming, easier to dodge, easier to wait out. So the D count is a risk assessment, communicated instantly to every bird within earshot. When you hear a chickadee going off in your yard, other birds are already responding before the call even ends. Starlings cluster tighter. Finches drop off the feeder. Nuthatches flatten against bark. The whole yard reorganizes itself in under 2 seconds based on information you probably filtered out as background sound. What most people never realize is that they can learn to read these differences. Not perfectly, not scientifically, but enough. Enough to hear a chickadee calling from the shrub near your feeder and understand that something in your yard just changed. Something that the birds detected before you did. Something they are trying to communicate to their whole community. They have been warning each other. They may have even been warning you. You just were not listening in the right language. What the silence said. But sometimes the warning is not a call at all. Sometimes the most powerful signal the birds send is no signal. Silence. If you spend enough mornings watching your yard, you will start to notice a pattern. There are silences that feel peaceful, the soft, full quietness between songs, the brief pauses when the wind drops and everything just breathes. And then there are silences that feel different. Thinner. Tighter. Loaded with something unspoken. That second kind of silence is a warning too. When a predator is close, truly close, not just passing at distance, birds do not always call. Calling reveals your position. It announces your location to the very thing you are trying to avoid. So instead of crying out, some birds go completely still and completely quiet. A sparrow that was hopping along the ground simply stopped. A titmouse that was vocalizing 3 seconds ago has vanished behind a branch and gone silent. The yard empties without a sound. This is one of the most chilling things you can witness once you understand it. You are looking at a yard full of birds that have suddenly decided to become invisible. And the reason they have made that choice is that something dangerous enough to demand total concealment has entered their awareness. Ornithologists call this phenomenon predator-induced silence, and it is well documented across multiple songbird species. The behavioral shift is rapid, coordinated, and incredibly effective. From the outside, it just looks like the birds left. But they have not left. Many of them are still there, pressed flat against branches, tucked inside the thickest part of the shrub, completely motionless, completely silent, waiting. Waiting for what? For the threat to pass. For the silence to break in a way that signals safety. For the boldest bird in the group, often a sentinel individual who has earned a kind of social authority through repeated accurate alarm giving, to signal that the coast is clear. And here is the part that connects to you more personally than you might expect. You have probably stepped outside on a morning when the yard felt wrong. When it was too quiet in a way you could not explain. When your chest registered something your brain had not yet processed. And you looked around and saw nothing unusual and went back inside and never thought about it again. But the birds knew something. They registered something before you did, and they acted on it, and that action produced the silence that brushed against your awareness just enough to make you pause. They were already in the middle of their warning system. You were standing inside it. The relationship that was already building. Now here is where everything shifts. Because this is not only about warnings of danger. That would tell only half the story. The same behavioral architecture that allows birds to warn each other about predators, the same distributed awareness, the same shared signals, the same community of attention, also allows them to communicate something equally important. Safety. The absence of alarm is its own message. And over time, a yard that consistently generates safety signals becomes something specific in the bird's understanding. It becomes a trusted zone. Place where the risk calculation tips toward comfort. Where a bird can lower its head to eat without scanning every 2 seconds. Where two birds can interact or argue over a perch without having to keep their full defensive attention locked outward. Your yard has either become that place, or it is somewhere on the journey toward it. The signals that create a trusted zone are subtle but real. A yard where no predator has successfully attacked in a long time carries a kind of behavioral evidence the birds accumulate. Where the food source has always been reliable, where the approach routes are open and clear, where the escape routes are intact, the hedgerow that lets a bird flush quickly, the dense shrub that provides cover without obscuring sightlines, these things communicate safety in a language birds read without thinking. And you are part of that calculation. The birds that use your yard have been tracking your behavior the same way they track a predator. Not with fear, that is the important distinction. With pattern recognition. They know how you move. They know the sounds you make when you are outside. They know whether you are a person who moves quickly and unpredictably, or someone who moves slowly and steadily and tends to leave the birds alone. They have made a judgment about you. Not a simple one. A nuanced one. A judgment built over many observations, many mornings, many moments where you either reinforced their comfort or triggered their alarm. And the result of that judgment shows up in how close they come. In whether they flush the moment you appear at the window or continue eating with one eye on you. In whether they land near you when you sit quietly outside, or keep a buffer distance of 15 feet that they never quite close. That distance is a measurement. It is called the flight initiation distance, and it reflects exactly how much trust the bird has extended to you specifically. Not to humans in general. To you. In your yard. In the relationship you have built together, consciously or not. When the warnings were about you. This is the part that is hardest to accept, and also the most important. Some of the warnings that have traveled through your yard have been about you. Not because you are a predator. Not because you have done something wrong. But because you are large, you are unpredictable at certain moments, and you sometimes appear in their space in ways that trigger exactly the same threat assessment process they apply to anything uncertain and unknown. Think about the times you moved too quickly to the window. Or slid open the back door with more energy than usual. Or walked across the yard while the feeder was busy. The birds read every one of those moments. They rated your approach. They communicated your presence to each other using the same calls, the same stillness, the same flush pattern they use for any potential threat. And over time, you were either sorted out of the threat category, or you were not. What is remarkable is that individual birds remember. This is not a population-level generalization where all birds of a species vaguely tolerate humans. This is individual birds, in your specific yard, learning your specific presence. Studies on urban corvids have demonstrated individual recognition of human faces with impressive accuracy. Research on other songbirds has documented what biologists describe as habituation, a real, earned reduction in alarm response to a specific individual over repeated non-threatening exposures. The birds in your yard know you. Not as a name. Not with any human category of recognition. But as a recognizable pattern. A shape. A movement style. A level of threat they have personally calculated based on real experience. So when you go outside now and the birds do not all flee, when the chickadee continues working the feeder or the cardinal stays on the branch and watches you pass, that is not indifference. That is trust. Specifically directed. Personally extended. Hard-earned and genuinely meaningful. But if they consistently keep maximum distance, consistently flush the moment you appear, consistently go silent every time you step outside, that is also information. That is the birds telling you that the relationship has not yet reached a certain threshold. That the warnings they send about your presence are still going out. The question is not whether this bothers you. The question is what you do with the information. The warning signs most people misread. There are certain behaviors in your yard that almost everyone misreads. Not because people are careless, but because these signals do not look like what we expect warnings to look like. A bird sitting completely still on a branch, staring in one direction. Not singing. Not feeding. Just watching. Most people assume this bird is resting. Taking a break. Maybe just pausing before its next activity. What is almost certainly happening is sentinel behavior. This bird has taken up a watch position. It is actively scanning. Its stillness is not rest. It is extreme attention. The kind of focused, motionless attention that a bird engages when it knows something is nearby and it is trying to track that something without triggering it. And the rest of the birds in the yard are aware of that sentinel. They are monitoring it with a portion of their attention even while they continue feeding. If that still bird suddenly moves, if it flushes or changes posture sharply, the entire yard responds before the reason for the flush even becomes visible. Another signal people consistently misread. The bird that arrives at the feeder and immediately flies off without eating. This looks like a skittish bird. An anxious bird. Maybe a bird that did not find what it wanted. What it often means is that the bird came to test the feeder's safety level and found the risk too high in that moment. Maybe there were not enough birds already feeding. Feeder use by one species signals to others that conditions are currently acceptable. When the feeder is empty of birds, a cautious individual will often do exactly what you just saw: arrive, assess, leave. Come back later when others have declared it safe through their presence. Your feeder is not just a food source. It is a social information hub. The presence or absence of feeding birds at any given moment is a communication in itself. And then there is the warning that travels across species lines. When a crow or a jay sounds an alarm in your yard, they are not just telling other crows and jays. They are releasing information into the community. The sparrows hear it. The finches hear it. The robins hear it. Cross-species alarm eavesdropping is a well-documented phenomenon. Birds listen to the alarm calls of other species not related to them at all, and they respond to those calls appropriately. This means that the warning system in your yard is not siloed. It is shared. The whole community is listening to the whole community all the time. Every alarm, every flush, every stillness travels through the air and lands in the ears of birds that may have had no direct line of sight to the original threat. Your yard is always in conversation, even when it sounds quiet. The memory beneath the warning. Here is something that reaches further than a single morning. Birds remember. Not vaguely. Not with the blurred, imprecise recall people sometimes imagine when they think about animal memory. Certain birds, particularly the corvids and some passerines, maintain memories so specific and so durable that behavioral scientists have had to revise their assumptions about the cognitive capacity of avian brains entirely. The Clark's nutcracker can cache thousands of seeds across hundreds of locations and retrieve most of them months later. The western scrub jay can remember not just where it cached food, but when, distinguishing between food that has already gone bad and food that is still viable, adjusting its retrieval behavior accordingly. This is episodic-like memory. The kind of memory scientists thought was uniquely human. But even for the smaller, simpler birds in your yard, the birds with less dramatic reputations for intelligence, Memory plays a profound role in the warning system. A bird that was chased from your feeder by a neighborhood cat last August has not forgotten that. Not in the sense that humans carry grudges, but in the sense that its approach to that feeder carries an added layer of risk assessment that a bird with no such history does not carry. The feeder has a memory score, and that score shapes every future decision that bird makes about whether to come close, stay long, or keep one eye on the corner of the yard where the cat appeared. This is why some birds seem irrationally cautious about your yard even when there is no visible threat. They are not being irrational. They are incorporating information you do not have access to. Information from encounters you did not witness. From moments when the yard felt dangerous and no one from the outside could have known it. The warning system is not only active in the present. It accumulates. It builds a kind of collective risk biography for your space. Every threat that was detected, every flush that happened, every close call that resolved well or badly, all of it adds to the bird's working model of what your yard is and what it demands of them. This is why changes to your yard can ripple through bird behavior in ways that seem disproportionate to what you actually changed. You moved the feeder 3 feet. The birds vanished for a week. You removed a dense shrub near the feeding area. The variety of visitors dropped noticeably and did not recover to previous levels for months. They are not being dramatic. They are recalibrating a relationship, updating a mental model that has been built on accumulated experience. And until the new arrangement has been tested enough times to generate a new confidence score, the caution stays elevated. Every change in your yard is an event in the relationship. What you can do with what you now know. There is a natural question that rises here. If the birds have been warning each other, reading the yard, rating your presence, and building a collective memory of what your space means, what does that actually allow you to do differently? The answer starts with something simpler than most people expect: consistency. The single most powerful thing you can offer the birds in your yard, more than the quality of the seed, more than the design of the feeder, more than any specialized habitat feature, is behavioral predictability. Birds do not need you to be absent. They need you to be readable. A person who goes outside at the same time every morning, moves at the same pace, stands or sits in the same location, and leaves without any sudden changes in direction or sound, that person becomes something the birds can categorize. Not as threat. Not as neutral either, in the early days. But eventually, as something the risk assessment can settle on and release. Predictability is how you stop being included in their warning system. Unpredictability is what keeps a person permanently coded as a moderate-level concern. Not a hawk. But not quite safe either. Something to monitor. Something to factor into every feeding decision, every landing choice, every quiet moment in the yard. The birds that flush the moment you appear have not decided you are dangerous. They have decided you are uncertain. And uncertainty costs energy. It costs feeding time, attention, and rest. So they manage the uncertainty by maintaining distance. The distance itself is the management strategy. If you want to move closer to being trusted, genuinely trusted, in a way the birds express through their behavior, not just their continued presence, the path is patience and consistency practiced over real time. Not days. Often weeks. Sometimes an entire season. Move slowly when you are outside. Make sounds rather than sudden silences. Birds process unexpected stillness almost as alertly as unexpected movement. Let them see you without reacting to you. Do not stare directly at them for long periods. Direct eye contact is a predator behavior across many species, and birds have picked up on this association across millions of years of coevolution. Look obliquely. Let your attention feel indirect. And let time do the work the birds need it to do. ##, the warning that changed into something else. There is a final layer here that matters more than any of the others. The warning system is not just about danger. And the relationship is not just about trust. Both of those things are true. But there is a third dimension that has been quietly present throughout everything we have covered today. Belonging. When a bird has spent enough time in your yard, when the morning routine includes your yard as a reliable stop, when the memory score is high enough, when the flight initiation distance has narrowed to something genuinely close, something shifts in the nature of what happens between you and that bird. The warnings that go out when you appear start to carry a different weight. Instead of the alarm note, instead of the sudden flush, you get something more like an announcement. The birds in the yard acknowledge your presence and adjust around it rather than evacuating from it. The chickadee works closer. The robin continues pulling worms from the lawn 3 feet from where you are sitting, with one eye on you the way it keeps one eye on everything, alert but not alarmed. You have become part of the yard's behavioral landscape in a way that the birds have accepted rather than resisted. And this, more than anything else, is what the warnings were always pointing toward. Not the danger they announced. Not the silence they demanded. But the moment when the danger was not there, when the silence was the soft and full kind rather than the charged kind, when the birds in your yard had extended their community of attention to include your presence without distress. That is the outcome of the relationship arc. That is what the warnings have been building toward every time they pass through your yard without you realizing it. Every alarm that settled. Every predator that passed without incident. Every morning where the yard felt right. All of it contributed to a collective understanding among the birds that this space, this yard, this predictable large creature who brings seeds and moves slowly and does not rush the space, all of this belongs. ##the morning you almost missed, revisited. So now go back to that moment. The feeder is still going. The shrubs are going quiet. The yard emptying between 1 second and the next without a sound that you could identify as the cause. You did not see it as a message. You saw it as birds being birds. Background noise to your morning, a small unexplained event that your brain filed away without meaning attached. But what actually happened was this. A sentinel in your yard detected something. The signal went out. A specific call, a specific posture, a specific behavioral shift that every bird in the community recognized immediately. The network responded as it always does, quickly, precisely, without confusion. The feeder cleared. The shrubs fell silent. The yard held its breath. And then, after the threat passed, the calls started again. The feeders refilled. The sparrows came back. The morning continued. You witnessed a communication system that has been operating in your yard for as long as birds have been using it. A system built on shared memory, social trust, precise encoding of danger, and the accumulated behavioral history of every bird that has ever spent time in your space. You were not outside the system. You were never outside the system. The birds incorporated you into it from the first morning. One of them landed on your feeder and made a decision about whether to stay. That decision, and every decision that has followed it, including this morning's, has always been an answer to a question the birds have been asking about your yard. Is this a place worth returning to? Is this a place where the warnings can eventually soften into something quieter? Is this a place where the relationship between bird and space, between wild creature and the human who tends it, has earned a kind of trust that both sides can rest inside? The birds have been answering that question every single morning. The only thing that has changed today is that you finally heard them. They have been warning you. They have been watching you. They have been building something in your yard that you almost missed entirely. Now that you know it is there, you will never see a quiet feeder the same way again.